Just thinking. There it goes. We're live. This is Parenting Porcupines, just our third live broadcast here in season 2. This is episode 3. It's called Lemonade Stands and Liberty. We're going to get started. Let's do it. Hello, friends. It's a little bit of a different background for a couple of us this week. For me, I'm broadcasting from my sister's house in the upstate. There might be some dog barking in the background because they're really pissed at me for not letting them be here. We're missing Alex, so we're a threesome instead of our regular quad. And Jessica, you're somewhere bizarre too. We're going to get to you in just a second, though. First, I'm Kasie. I'm normally in the Midlands. My daughter is 12. We're homeschool parents, which we're kind of rocking it right now, to be honest. Kind of digging that. 6th grade is a whole lot easier when you don't have to be in the halls with a bunch of other noisy 6th and 7th graders. So, Melissa, who are you? Where are you? Who are your kids?
I am Melissa. I'm in the Low Country. I was going to say, where am I? Charleston. I'm in Charleston. My kids are 6, 7, and 10. And I'm very excited for today's conversation. We are opening up a cookie company. So that's my son's cookie company, my 10-year-old. So we'll see. But this is very close to my heart.
All right. Kids and entrepreneurship. It's going to be a good one for you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Jessica.
Sorry, real quick. You've also got the most noise in the background, so forgive us, audience, as we continually mute Melissa. It's not that we don't want to hear what she has to say, but man, that's crazy back there.
Yeah.
Look, it sounds like Saturday night, which is like Jessica and I are like super sad on our Saturday nights where there's nobody behind me but dogs. And Jessica, where are you? What's so sad about your Saturday night, Jessica?
My Saturday night is not sad. It is actually quite a party here. I'm actually broadcasting from Spartanburg, which is down the road from Greenville, where I live. We are having Christmas tonight because of COVID. We had to, postpone all of our family festivities. So we're together with my dad and my stepmom and my stepsister and her husband. And so all the kids are going strong, and I've got my
the big bottle of wine, drinking directly out of the bottle.
I am.
Get some glasses. Glasses are for suckers.
That's right. But I'm broadcasting from my nephew's bedroom, so you'll see his fancy race car bed behind me. I kind of want one of these bad boys. It's kind of nice. But the idea for tonight's episode is, as Kasie said, it's called Lemonade Stands and Liberty. And Melissa actually gave kind of a good kind of segue into the conversation with her kids starting a business. We wanted to talk about kids and entrepreneurship and how licensing laws and ordinances can oftentimes discourage that for kids, for anybody really. And it's such an important topic, I think, because you hear this story every summer, maybe not last summer because COVID, I don't think any kids had lemonade stands, but it's a pretty common story. And I think we've got some links in our show notes to a few articles about various instances where neighbors have called the police on kids for, their lemonade stands, or, police have been somehow directed and they've shut down these lemonade stands. Because of local business laws or, licensing ordinances and things like that. And it's interesting in how that's a bigger conversation, because we, as libertarians, we talk about that being something that impedes, and it creates this barrier to people being able to start business. And we heard a lot about that in this past campaign because we had some very active candidates even before we nominated the people who were on our ballot. After the South Carolina State Convention, that was, I think, one of the first conventions. Jacob Hornberger, who was one of our people who were running, and Spike Cohen, who was our vice presidential nominee, they joined with the Libertarian Party of North Carolina, and they actually went up to Wilmington, North Carolina, and did a door knocking campaign. And so they went into some of the some of the poorer neighborhoods and spoke with some of the disenfranchised people. And if Spike's watching, I'm sure he'll correct me in the comments if I say anything wrong. But someone told a story, and I can't remember if it was one of Jacob's stories or one of Spike's stories, but they were actually speaking with the woman who was talking about how she loved to braid hair, and she was very, very good at braiding hair, and she braided hair for her friends and her family and people in the neighborhood. But she was always so scared that she was going to get caught and she was going to get fined for doing this because she didn't have a license to do it. And so something as simple as braiding hair, I mean, that's her craft. She's not able to do that with any level of peace of mind because she's constantly worried about getting in trouble with the government because she doesn't have a license to do this thing. And so
we've been talking about, and part of this was through the campaign in the fall, and part of it has been just sort of an ongoing conversation with the Libertarian Party about how does government creep too deep into business, right? And so there's two sides of the question. The first question is, why do the regulations exist? Are they there to protect consumers, to keep consumers from buying things from unruly businessmen, right? And if you think back into like the turn of the century where there's like snake oil salesmen and this kind of concept, if you can get that, you can get sort of a sense of like maybe that was the way it was in the past. But then you start thinking, okay, well, how do we regulate that now? Are there mechanisms to regulate that now? And then the other side of this is, how do people have control of their own destiny? How are they free people if in fact they have to be given permission to make a living? And so I thought tonight, like, we're going to talk about these two things, but of course we're about parenting. So most of what this does is like, how do you put this in context for your kids? And how do you teach them about the one side or the other? So Melissa, why don't you weigh in on this? Like, what do you think in terms of, you guys are getting ready to start a business. What do you think in terms of why does the government regulate the way they do?
I think convincing people that they shouldn't regulate the way they do is an uphill battle because people have gotten complacent. Well, no, they're open, so they must be good. It must be okay to eat here or buy their products. It must be safe. Like, I don't know. There's recalls all the time. My favorite example is every restaurant on Kitchen Nightmares had a government stamp of approval. And Gordon Ramsay goes in there and shows how disgusting it is. You wouldn't send your worst enemy to eat there. It's disgusting. Right. But the government said it's okay.
Right.
That's perfectly fine. So
those DHEC ratings, man. And the ones and they have to put them up visible for everybody, right? Like we got an 89.7% and we got a 92% and we got a 97% or whatever, right? And you're like, this place is filthy. If you've ever worked in the restaurant industry, you'll see the things that you were told as a worker to keep clean, that restaurant is just letting slide, right? So yeah, I'm with you. I think in some cases, human consumers have gotten lazy, that they think that the government's thumbs up is sufficient.
Means it's okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to get scammed by these people because the government checked them out for me and I don't have to check them out myself. But Jessica, do you think there's another mechanism beyond the government to do this? Is there something else that can regulate the quality of the services and the products that we're consuming?
I mean, I think, yes. First of all, obviously, free market, right? Because if we're not being lazy, and as consumers, we are paying attention to who we are patronizing with our money and our time or whatever thing we're giving for these services. We can choose not to do that, right? And if we choose not to do that, if we choose not to give our money, then that business isn't going to survive, right? So, but the other thing is, I'm a big fan of like professional associations and organizations and certifying through those types of organizations, which might be a separate conversation. So I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but you can have those types of organizations that kind of oversee within that professional sphere and hold people accountable there. Because, for instance, attorneys do have to be licensed to practice law in the state of South Carolina. I think they do in every state, but I'm going to speak to South Carolina. legal that's my field. So this is something that I know a little bit more about. So that's the why I chose this as an example. But, if you have that organization, maybe let that organization handle the licensing and then the regulating of that profession. It's a voluntary association. You don't have to be associated with this association, but if you are, it gives you that boost, right? Because people know that you're associated with it, but people can still use you. If you're a good lawyer and you're not, why shouldn't they be able to use you? Why do you have to have a license to practice law?
Right.
That's just kind of, and I'm probably going to get some heat from my attorney friends for this, but it's just kind of like, that's a good example of something that really could be privatized, that, maybe you don't need to have a license.
Yeah. And if it's a private association saying this person is a competent lawyer and they're not, and you use them, you have recourse against that association.
Right.
You can't sue the government because they gave a business license to someone who's a jerk and who's incompetent. You have no recourse at all.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And so to the point of the professional associations and these private associations, there's skin in the game for them, right? Like there's what's the right word for it? There's incentives to make sure that
competing organizations.
The only people that they're going to approve are going to be the people that they're willing to approve. You think about this from like, if somebody asks you for a recommendation for a job and you're like, yeah, but if you get the job and you act like a jerk, I'm going to look like an idiot for having recommended you, right? Mm-hmm. And so a professional association serve that function. So if those associations are serving that function, let there be 6 or 7 of them. I mean, hell, in the state of South Carolina, you could have 13 different organizations that are for professional hair braiders in South Carolina, and every hair braider would buy into whichever organization was the right one for them. But even still, that organization's only going to certify them if, in fact, this is a competent hair braider, right? And then the hair braider goes, here, I have my professional organization thing, but I'm able to do business. And she's able to do business whether she has it or not. That's the key, is that these association memberships and the association thumbs up doesn't prohibit you from making a living out of this. One of the stories that Spike told during the campaign, when he came to the last stop on the campaign trail before Election Day at the State House in South Carolina, he was talking to people who are doing like handyman jobs, and they're working for cash under the table, and they're running businesses that are competent businesses, but they can't get a business license. They can't get a business loan. I mean, the license thing, truthfully, you walk into the business. I mean, the state of South Carolina gave me mine when I sent them $75. I had no idea what my business was even going to do. So it's actually pretty cheap to get a business license in South Carolina. So I'm not going to excuse the license thing. Like, you should at least have a business license so people know, that you're running a business. But I will say this, like, the only reason they want you to have a license is so that they know they can tax you. This is not about quality. They don't give a damn what I'm doing or who I'm doing it for. The only reason I have to have a business license is so that at the end of the year, they can say to me, did you pay your taxes for what the business earned? And honestly, that's a whole bunch of bullshit, quite frankly. Like, the business license itself is not a recommendation that I'm any better than any other consultant in the state. All it says is I'm registered with the government and therefore I will pay taxes. That's all it says. And I don't understand why that matters. And again, we're libertarians. So screw that, get the fuck out of it. Like, the government doesn't have any business with this. If these and this is the story Spike was telling, if the handymen need to make money to put food on the table for their family, if this is a skill that they have and somebody else is willing to pay for it, why does the government have to be part of this? And this goes all the way back to our initial impetus for this conversation, Jessica, which is the lemonade stands from the kids. Like, these are kids out there selling lemonade. So talk about that for a second. Like, if your kid goes out there and is like, I'm going to do this thing. Like, I mean, you as their parent, since you bought the lemonade and the cups and you're giving them space on your lawn, you should be allowed to tax your kid's lemonade stand. But the government itself should have no part of this, right?
Yeah. I mean, they shouldn't. I mean, you think about it, I do want to go back to something you said about the business license being a you know, a very small expense, like 75. I don't remember. I think it might be 50 here in Greenville. So for us, that's not a lot, right? We can handle that. But I mean, you think about someone in a disenfranchised neighborhood or someone who is just struggling to get by, who's feeding their kids peanut butter and saltines because that's all they can buy, and they can braid hair like nobody's business. That $75 is not going to be easy to come by.
And it's still her money.
It is
still her money and not the government's money, and they have no right to it.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get that business license, they know you exist. So now you have quarterly taxes. It's scary because you're like, what if I do this wrong? I'm going to get all sorts of fine. They're going to come and, you know, even if you try to do it, if you can't afford a lawyer or an accountant who understands the convoluted tax code, you can try to do your best, but you might do it wrong. And
So
that's scary.
You make a really good point, Melissa, because one of the things I put in the in our show notes, if you're looking for the show notes, they're out on parentingporcupines.com. This is season 2, episode 3. Our show notes are talking a little bit, because I get a little business nerdy about this stuff. Michael Porter's 5 Forces talks about how do you get into an industry, right? How do you start participating in an industry as a company? And those barriers to entry, one of them is the threats of new entrants, right? Could new companies come into this industry and start competing with you? And also threat of substitutes. Is there somebody else doing exactly what you do that they could beat you out? And what ends up happening 9 times out of 10 with regulations is that those regulations are funded by, right? And by funded, I mean, it's lobbyists, it's people funding the campaigns, they're forcing this legislation in intentionally to keep people out. One of the broadcasts that all of us listen to, the podcast we all listen to, Words and Numbers, talked about the state of New York putting in a regulation for hair washers. So individuals who wash hair in salons have to have something like 1,200 hours of continuing education every year to keep their license as a hair washer. Hair washer. This is a minimum wage job. And the continuing education hours for this job are higher than they are for doctors, like for medical people who are cutting you open, right? For hair washers. This regulation is not because they're trying to protect you from getting a bad hair wash. This regulation is because people want to keep other people out of this job. And they've leaned on their legislators to do that. And they've said, we want to prevent other people from getting into this field. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to make it harder for them to become hair washers, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. When the government gets into that, when they get into, if it's Uber in London, and the government gets into deciding who can do this job and who can do that job, I mean, the first question that comes to mind is like, what the fuck? But I'm going to ask you guys, like, is it fair? Should the government be deciding who gets to do this? And if not, why not?
Absolutely not.
It's a free country.
Well, I think so. And for those of you who are watching who are not familiar with libertarians, we are quite a diverse bunch. We do not fall into these little boxes, right? There are a lot of different libertarians who believe a lot of different things, all within this kind of general, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. We talked about that in the first season, the non-aggression principle. But personally, I'm what they call a minarchist. So it's somebody who believes in very small government, the minimum amount of government. I'm not quite an anarchist. I'm more of a minarchist. I would like to be an anarchist. That's maybe another episode. But I'm a minarchist. So I think that the government does have a place. I think that a federal level government, I think that a very small state level government does have a function, right? And that is to protect the rights of the people. And we all know that our basic rights are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? Like those are the things that we are entitled to. Those are our rights. And part of that is the right to make a living, whatever wage, right? And so I don't think that it is fair for the government to have the authority to say, you can't do that, because especially because it's going to hurt this other person or this other company. Like it's going to make them not make more money or whatever it is. So no, I don't think the government has the right. I don't think the government has any rights, but again, maybe another episode.
Right. It has one job.
It has one job, and it's the post office.
You had
That's
one
job.
One job.
So Melissa, what do you think? If it's not going to be the government that says you can do this and the other people can't do that, what's going to do it? What's going to figure that out? How are we going to know that we're not buying fake stamps, right? From like, how are we going to know we're not getting scammed by snake oil salesmen? How are we going to figure it out?
Let me check my watch. Oh yeah, it's 2021 and we have the internet and we have this thing called Yelp. The Better Business Bureau's online. There's lots of review sites, Angie's List. I mean, I'm in 3 Facebook groups that tell you about scummy companies around town who not to do business with. That's how you know. I mean, it's the internet. You have all the information.
Yeah, you're going to crowdsource that, right? But so this week, that crowdsourcing.
So some people will get scammed. Sorry.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Use
They're bad
PayPal.
people.
Use PayPal. They'll give you your money back. It's fine.
That's it.
But you can't.
That's a whole other episode. PayPal and the Instagram scam. Like,
But
I feel like
think-
I should write a little story. PayPal and the Instagram scam.
No, because I'll buy stuff online, like from those Facebook ads, and a couple of times it's been, there's an ad today, they're gone tomorrow, they got your money. I always use PayPal because I can just say, hey, PayPal, give me my money. These people weren't legit.
I think it's important when we have this conversation because, like you said, what we're talking about here is legislating morality, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is legislation of morality. You are legislating good business practices, which you shouldn't have to do. And if someone doesn't have good business practices, their community is going to know that. Again, like Melissa said, they're probably going to get away with it for a little while. Guess what? Bad people do shitty things. I mean, there are plenty of, I'm going to go back to the legal field. There are plenty of really scummy attorneys who get away with things for a really long time, but eventually they get caught, they get disbarred, and it is what it is. People are going to be affected by that. That is always going to happen, whether you have this legislation, these licensing laws, these ordinances or not. It's going to happen. But you can't legislate morality. You can't legislate good business practices. And I think that's the crux of it. And I think that as a community, we all have to be involved, and we all have to, like you said, Kasie, you crowdsource that information.
So I want to unmute here, but I may have to go back on mute in a second because one of my sister's dogs is trying desperately to get into this room. Like, seriously, it sounds like a shark. It's like I'm under attack by jaws. But here's what's interesting to me about us choosing this topic for this week. We were talking about little kids, lemonade stands, like entrepreneurism. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Go out there and make a living, and like the government should get out of the way. And I want to go on record as saying this on YouTube. I believe if government wants to help entrepreneurs, they should not tax them for the first 5 years of their business. They should let the business do what the business is going to do for the first 5 years. Just give them 5 years. And if they can make a living, if they can do a thing, they will be so grateful. They will be glad to pay taxes to reimburse the resources that they were given in the first place. But when you start taxing those businesses right off the bat and you prevent them from being able to be successful, to me, quite frankly, it's authoritarianism, and it is the wrong way to grow the economy. So I'm just going to put that out there. 5 years in the beginning, you should be able to say, boom, 5 years, the clock is ticking. I'm not going to have to pay taxes until my 5-year mark. Blah. Okay. In addition to that, the reason I think this week it was interesting to talk about this is the Robin Hood scenario this week. I know. Let's just take a little moment to chuckle over GameStop. GameStop. And and what happened with the trading and all that. So you don't have to be a Wall Street expert to know basically what happened this week was the people who make the gold make the rules, and the people who make the rules got fucked by a bunch of people who were using an app called Robinhood this week. And they were buying up GameStop stock, and they ran up the price of the stock. And when the stock price started to get manipulated by these players, a lot of people got really mad about it. And the people that got really mad about it were the ones that thought they were the ones manipulating the stock. And in fact, they were not the ones manipulating the stock. And so all of this is going to shake out into like a weird kind of, I don't know, a movie probably starring Steve Carell at some point. But before we get to that point, the bottom line is here's a company, Robinhood, that's always been under scrutiny for having gamified stock trading, for trying to democratize what has traditionally been a very high barriers to entry industry. And they've lowered those barriers to entry. And once they did, the volatility of the industry got so out of control that the people who had traditionally been in charge of that industry got pissed about it. And if we break it down, we say, well, stock trading has always been risky. And anytime you try to regulate to try to hedge your risks, right, we're going to not be so risky, except we're extremely risky. We're always very risky. Like they're gaming the system. And when the system doesn't work for them, then they get mad, right? And that it was an interesting week in that now we're talking about what really is the role of regulation, what is the role of government, and when new entities come in and new players come into a business, is volatility something we're all comfortable with? And if it's not, what do we do about it? So I don't know if you guys have an opinion on this GameStop thing that happened this week, or if you want to just kind of in general weigh in on the democratization and the AOC jumping in the fight. Like, how are me and AOC on the same side of anything? I don't know, right? But I was just like, I could high five that girl right now. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Like she has a good job.
She has some good, she has some good takes, but usually when it's time to, follow up and have a backbone, she crumbles, which is unfortunate.
She wants to regulate too. She just doesn't want to regulate in favor of the hedge funds.
Yeah.
Now, I love Dollar Talk bitching about the time they got to read the funding bill, and she was complaining and saying it was wrong and we can't work like this, but she voted for it. So all her complaining came to no use.
Aw, can we give AOC a big bless her heart from South Carolina?
From the SCLP unofficial director of heart blessing, AOC, sugar bless your heart.
Bless your heart. All right. So here's the thing. There are fundraising businesses out there, right? And we think about regulation at the local level. Cheerleader car wash. What do you think? Should the cops show up and shut down the cheerleader car wash?
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't show up and shut down anything. But
one of the articles we have in the link is cops who showed up to the lemonade stand, and rather than shutting it down, they paid for a cup.
Yeah.
So good on those cops, and good on the idea that you don't need a permit to make a little bit of money here and there. All right.
Yep. And the lawn mowing and shoveling are the other two that get shut down a lot because, you don't have a license to mow lawns. Because I'm going around my neighborhood just asking people if they want their lawn mowed. It's not a business.
I agree. I have a real scenario. Elizabeth Colclard says, I got you guys on while I'm making dinner. Trying to get a new lawyer because your public defender isn't being competent. No one local will take that job. It's a club and they only want to protect their own. So thank you, Elizabeth, for listening. A little shout out to you. Thanks for commenting. We appreciate you. We live streamed on Facebook and YouTube at the same time today. So thanks to our likes, thanks to our watchers. We appreciate you guys. We're sorry that we missed Alex this week, but actually we've got some cool guests coming up. So from now on, when we know ahead of time that one of the four of us is not going to be here, we're going to be bringing on guests that want to participate with us. They're not all moms. Some of them are moms, but they're not all moms. So thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Melissa. We'll see you next time, Alex. We'll see you guys all next time. We're going to end the broadcast now. Good night. Happy Saturday.
Bye, guys.
Yes.